The second gen iPad Air released alongside the third generation iPad mini the October of 2014, bringing a slimmer, sleeker design over the first iPad Air alongside Touch ID for the first time on iPad. It might be easy to forget about this iPad. After all, it hasn't been sold since early 2017, but Apple sure remembers it as it's still somehow fully supported on iPadOS 15. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and the iPad Air 2 is the longest supported iOS device of all time. Well, technically it's on iPadOS now, but you know what I mean. Because of the way Apple updates their products, the Air 2 has at least until late 2022 to be fully supported, marking a full 8 years of software support. An absolutely ridiculous number, unmatched by any other product of its kind. So after all these years, how does the iPad Air 2 hold up? And is it still usable? Is it still usable might be a poorly worded question because, of course, it's still usable. The concept of being usable as a whole is subjective to the individual user. I'm sure there are those out there still using the very first iPad for various things, even if it's stuck on decade-old software. But what the iPad Air 2 has is that full iOS support, granting it access to nearly anything and everything even the top-of-the-line iPad Pro can do. It won't be as fast or as smooth or as enjoyable of an experience, but it'll get the job done. And that's so much more than can be said from basically any device from 2014. Little did buyers know over 7 years ago, when getting the iPad Air 2, they were getting one of the best value tech devices ever made by virtue of Apple never leaving it behind. Something that really ought to be commended. And in a lot of ways, the iPad Air 2 kind of represents, to me at least, the first in the line of modern iPads. Coming before the first iPad Pro, but still looking a whole lot like Apple's cheapest iPads they're selling today. You could argue for the first iPad Air, but it didn't have Touch ID, so we're going with this. In fact, this Air 2 is actually better than those current cheap iPads, as it has a laminated display, which means the LCD and front glass are sealed together, making the entire experience feel at your fingertips, versus, say, the iPad 9th generation, where there's a noticeable air gap. This here's a 5th generation iPad, but it's the same thing. The iPad Air 2 brought the Touch ID home button that's still being used today on Apple's lower tier devices, and there's a different form of it on the current iPad Air, a line that still exists, but actually took a bit of a hiatus after the Air 2. This Air 2 was sold from late 2014 to early 2017, so about 2.5 years. And once discontinued, it would be another 2 years before the early 2019 iPad Air 3rd gen would launch, having a slightly larger display, but overall still not being very different from what came a half-decade prior. And that wouldn't last, with the iPad Air line finally being fully redesigned in late 2020 with the 4th gen, moving to the small bezel design of the iPad Pro and getting rid of the home button altogether. The iPad Air exists now as this in-between option between the cheaper iPad and the iPad Pro, with it looking similar to that Pro but having less power, Edge no Pro Motion, but being a fantastic device all the same. The iPad Air 2 came out before the Apple Pencil did, so it's unsupported completely in that regard. It also misses out on a few more grandiose features of iPadOS due to the older hardware, most of which won't be noticed in daily use, but you know, there's a lack of some augmented reality stuff, sidecar with macOS, nothing too big. It does, however, have the majority of features, including the relatively new mouse and trackpad feature that came with iPadOS 13.4. What's really surprising about the iPad Air 2 getting support for so long is that the iPhone of the same year, iPhone 6, only got until iOS 12, and the Air 2 so far has 3 more versions in 13, 14, and now 15. We have here Apple's A8X chipset as opposed to just the A8 on the iPhone 6, and that definitely helps, but still, 3 years of software is a lot. What's even more important than this is that the iPad Air 2 has 2 GB of RAM, whereas the iPhone 6 had only a single gig, giving significantly more power potential when it comes to everyday tasks. How do we know this is the most important aspect? Well, the 2015 iPad mini 4 is also running iPadOS 15, and it also has 2 GB of RAM. Yet, it has the same A8 chipset found in the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, no X at the end of it. Apple's dedication to their older devices is unparalleled in the industry, industry and really adds to the positive reputation they've developed when it comes to customer support, at least in regards to updates. Normally, I like to start things off with the design of a device, so because of the iPad Air 2's unique spot in Apple's lineup, I thought I'd start with the performance and technical capabilities. After all, a 2014 device running 2021 or 2022 software is unheard of, and I'll beat that drum as much as possible because, honestly, it deserves some respect. It's just a straight-up consumer-friendly move on Apple's part when they very easily could have updated it to only iOS 12 even, and no one would have complained. And yet, here we are on iPadOS 15. It's extremely unlikely it gets iPadOS 16, as the hardware is very old at this point, but then again, I said the same thing last year, so who knows at this point. One thing Apple detractors like to argue is that while Apple gives lots of updates, their purpose in it is supposedly maliciously driven, as the updates slow down your device to the point of eventually needing to just buy a new device outright. While this is something that's happened in the past, maybe intentionally, maybe not, I'm happy to report that the iPad Air 2 feels shockingly usable on iPadOS 15. Not fast by any means, but usable. There's lag for sure, and things can take a while to load, but everything just works about as well as you could hope for. Basic things aren't frustrating to do, and the little slowdown here and there doesn't make you want to throw your tablet out the window like the iPad 2 on iOS 9 did. With a little patience, the iPad Air 2 is more than good enough for the general things you would use a tablet for. Video streaming is probably the biggest one on Netflix or YouTube, for example, but then you also got other things like social media or email, web browsing, even some games as long as they're not too intensive. Like I was playing some Clash Royale, no problem on here. Leading up to this video, I've been making a point to use this iPad in my daily life, and it's continually impressed me. I've never been annoyed enough to actually put it down. The worst I experienced was just a bit of lag here and there, and doing things like downloading apps from the App Store. Now that being said, that's my experience. And though I have been using this thing for a little while now, it's going to be a lot cleaner of a device than many others out there. Maybe not literally. I have a problem when it comes to filming. I have a dog, so dog hair sometimes gets on things, and that's always annoying to notice later. Or fingerprints. I'm so bad with remembering to wipe off the fingerprints, but anyways, if you're nearly full on storage, which is very much possible, as the lowest tier model had 16 gigabytes when it launched, there's a solid chance the device will feel slower than it should. And for some reason, Apple doesn't let you see the battery health in the settings. Battery life is a department I've been pretty happy with thus far, but if you have a bad battery, you're gonna have a rough time. I'm trying to say that experiences vary user to user, and if you're wanting to move on from the Air 2, I mean, it is a 7-year-old device, I highly recommend the iPad 9th generation. It's blazing fast, and at an amazing value of only $329 American. Sounds like I'm running an ad here, but it's a crazy good deal, especially considering just how much these older iPads like the Air 2 still somehow cost on like eBay, which we'll get to. Let's take a look at the camera real quick. We've got, of course, two sensors, one on the front, one on the back. The selfie camera there is only 1.2 megapixels, which was pretty standard around 2014 for Apple. It takes fine selfies. It'll work for FaceTime. I don't think you'd want to do any more with it. The rear camera is 8 megapixels, upgrading from the 2013 iPad Air's 5 megapixels, so pretty decent upgrade, and it can record video in up to 1080p at 30 frames per second. That video, as you can see here, is actually, it's not good, but it's maybe not horrible. It is 1080p, and you know, it's pretty much what you would expect from like a smartphone around 2013, 2014, so for a tablet, hard to complain. Pictures can be rough. You gotta be careful not to shake when you're taking photos. Very easy to get a blurry image. It does have HDR, of course, so there's definitely potential for some nice pictures, but I wouldn't expect that, and I mean, not a lot of people bring around iPads to take pictures nowadays anyways. You're definitely better off using your smartphone. So that about covers it probably for the camera. It's good enough for what it is, but generally speaking, probably won't want to use it over something better. You may have noticed by the black antenna band on the back, this is a cellular model of the iPad Air 2. So if I wanted to use internet away from Wi-Fi, I would just need to get a SIM card for it. I won't be doing that because I don't really need to, but I could if I wanted to. Turning more back to the technical specs, if you've watched my videos for a while, you may have noticed that I don't necessarily show off a lot of specifics or numbers when it comes to speed and performance. I don't look at the Geekbench scores. I don't do boot up tests. I don't see how many apps stay open in the background as I cycle through them. This is for a couple of reasons. A, it's really annoying to film that stuff, and B, the experience varies so much device to device and person to person that it's not going to give you an accurate depiction of what it would be like using the device daily. What I like to do is try to give a kind of impression of the experience, just mindlessly messing around iOS like this. You'll just need to take my word for it when I say, for me at least, it's been perfectly satisfactory. Again, it's just device to device, and considering considering that we're getting 8 years of software updates here, the little slowdowns that will inevitably happen are easily forgivable with that context. And not only does this iPad run the latest software, it really doesn't look out of date from a design standpoint either, with that Retina display being 9.7 inches at a resolution of 1536 by 2048, which makes about an equivalent quality to Apple's current tablets, as they all share a pixel density close to about 264 pixels per inch. It's a fabulous display. All the content on it is crisp and vibrant, and it's laminated too, so it looks really good. And while there are definitely other improvements that have come along, such as mini LED on the biggest iPad Pro, which I won't get into, when it comes down to it, this screen is about as good as the newer ones. What is a bit noticeable in comparison though is the bezels. They're definitely thicker on the sides, which is why the screen is 9.7 inches versus say the 2019 iPad Air 3rd Gen with its thinner sides and 10.5 inch display. Or there's the iPad 9, which has a 10.2 inch display. There's no question the newer iPads look sleeker, but there's no real practical benefit to the design difference beyond just the aesthetic. Yes, you do get slightly more screen real estate, but it's so little there's not going to be any real improvement. Plus, from the back, this looks like pretty much any other iPad, until the 2018 iPad Pro at least. But even on the iPad 9, you still have this general look with the flat, thin and light aluminum body and curved edges that just give this seamless form factor. The iPad Air 2 is comfortable to hold and to use. It's not hard to see why iPads never really deviated from this. Throughout this video, I've been trying to really establish just how well the iPad Air 2 has held up and how it continues to hold up in nearly every aspect. There's a reason it's running iPadOS 15, and it's not because Apple is trying to slow it down to force you to upgrade. It's a legitimately consumer-friendly move on their part, and they're doing it because they can. Apple's older hardware is just holding up better and better every year. That all being said, while these older devices are just as capable as they've ever been, that doesn't mean you should ever go out of your way to get one. A brand new iPad is an investment, right? It's something you probably will keep around longer than your smartphone. But if you already have an older iPad, like the Air 2, that's who this video is more geared towards. While an upgrade to a newer iPad would definitely be great and feel a lot faster, it's not at all necessary as of yet. And even when it does finally lose official software support, it's not going to suddenly roll over and die. You'll just slowly be siphoned off installing the latest app versions off the App Store throughout a couple years' time. If you need more convincing that the 9th generation iPad is a great deal, let's compare it real quick to the price of the iPad Air 2 on eBay.com, where you'll be paying an absurd $150 to $250 for one in half decent condition and ideally with more than 16 gigabytes of storage. Now, I did see some better deals here and there, but personally I would find it hard to shell out any more than maybe $100 for this, not because it's not worth that, because it is, but because the iPad 9 is so much better and only a couple $100 more. I'm not against buying used when it comes to smartphones, but for iPads, it's a lot harder to convince me when they all seemingly are so overpriced. Heck, for this video I paid $100 US myself, plus shipping and tax, for what I considered to actually be kind of a good deal. This space gray iPad Air 2 with 64 gigs of space in decent condition, not too shabby, right? Will I use it much after this? Probably not, but hey, maybe when it loses support I'll do another review, we'll see what happens. To summarize here, while I don't recommend buying one anymore, if you already have the iPad Air 2, there's absolutely a ton of life that can be squeezed out of this thing. A streaming device, a tablet for a kid, it's not fast and it's not going to be a completely smooth, frustration-free experience, but it gets the job done, and it does it in a package not too far from what Apple is still selling 7 years later, all on the latest version of iPadOS. If that's not an impressive feat for any tech product of this age, I don't know what is. And so with that, I think I'm right about done here. I've done a review on the first iPad Air if you'd like to see that, link in the description. And if you found this video interesting, make sure you hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter, Instagram, or even TikTok at 91_tech if you'd like to for some reason. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.